Please like and subscribe to my channel.
Today, we're digging into a pretty provocative argument, one that kind of flips the script on a really sensitive topic. It challenges what many of us think we know about the root causes of struggle in the Black community. And, it backs it up with some surprising evidence. So, let's get into it. Okay, so the entire argument we're about to walk through really hinges on this one single, bold claim from our source material. It's a statement that flies directly in the face of the prevailing narrative, so let's unpack what's actually behind it. Right, so if the argument is that racism isn't the primary thing driving these issues today, then the obvious question is, what is? Let's follow the evidence presented in the source and see what alternative explanation it offers up. To build its case, the argument starts somewhere you really might not expect: the era of legal segregation. Now let me be super clear here. The source is not in any way arguing this was a good time, it was an era of horrific injustice. The point being made is about the response of the community and its self-reliance before the huge policy shifts of the 1960s. So this right here is the central paradox of the argument. According to the source, when legal racism was at its absolute worst, the Black community showed incredible strength in some really key areas. I mean, we're talking about the highest marriage rate of any group in the country and a higher rate of small business formation than whites at the time. Kind of counterintuitive, right? And this slide gives us a really concrete example of that self-help spirit. So back in the 1920s, there was a 3-year education gap in the South. But check this out. A partnership was formed where the Black community actually invested more money than the CEO of Sears to build 5,000 of their own schools. And the result? In just 2 decades, that huge gap was closed to just 6 months. Incredible. And the educational achievements didn't stop there. The source points out that even with way fewer resources, used textbooks, overcrowded classrooms, Black high schools in major cities were often outperforming their white counterparts on academic tests. This isn't just about statistics, it's about a mindset. Take a look at the story of the Golden 13. They were literally set up to fail, given half the standard training time. But instead of quitting, these men chose to double down, study all night together, and they ended up scoring in the 93rd percentile. It's just a powerful story of resilience when the odds are stacked against you. So, if that was the mindset, and things were actually trending in a positive direction on many fronts, what changed? Well, this brings us to the argument's major turning point: the massive social policy shifts that happened in the 1960s. A whole new philosophy started to take hold, one that aimed to disconnect income from work. The idea was that government support should be available whether you're employed or not. And according to the source, this one idea fundamentally changed the economic incentives for individuals and families. This philosophy got put into practice through Lyndon Johnson's Great Society programs. Now, the argument here is that by offering welfare payments mainly to single mothers, the government, maybe without realizing it, created a financial disincentive for marriage. The source describes it as offering welfare as an alternative to a man in the house. And that brings us to the aftermath. So let's take a look at how the argument connects this policy shift to the really dramatic changes that were seen in the decades that followed. The impact on family structure as it's presented here is just stark. Before these policy changes, the out-of-wedlock birth rate in the Black community was below 25%. Today, that number has absolutely skyrocketed to 70%. And you see a similarly dramatic, kind of shocking trend when you look at incarceration rates. In 1960, around 90,000 Black Americans were incarcerated. Just 30 years later, that number had exploded to 900,000. That's a 10-fold increase. So where did all the money go? The source claims that of the $22 trillion spent on the war on poverty, 70 cents of every single dollar never actually reached the poor. Instead, it funded a massive bureaucracy of administrators and service providers, creating what the source calls a poverty industry. So given that diagnosis of the problem, the source proposes a solution that really moves away from those traditional government programs and instead calls for an internal, community-led revival. And this reframes the entire issue. The argument basically says that the core challenges aren't really economic, but are instead a crisis of morals and spirit, and that means they require a moral and spiritual solution. So the proposed strategy has 4 key parts. First, instead of studying failure, study the families who are succeeding against the odds. Second, embrace faith and moral redemption as central to restoration. Third, empower social entrepreneurs. people from the community with lived experience to lead the change. And finally, apply those old values of self-help and family that, as we saw earlier, seem to be so effective in the past. And this brings the entire argument full circle, doesn't it? It leaves us with a really provocative question. Could the very principles that helped people survive and even thrive during America's worst period of legal racism, could those be the answer to the challenges being faced today? And we'll end on this final thought from the source. The core philosophy here is that the most powerful people to make change are not outside experts, but witnesses, people with the lived experience and the moral authority to lead. It's an argument that puts the power of transformation not in policy, but in people.